This lecture gets at the question, just what is money anyway? I'm going to be reviewing some standard definitions by focusing on what money does more than what it is, because I think thinking through what money does for us, what functions it fulfills, and what its main characteristics are, helps us get a handle on what it is and gives us some tools and questions to ask whenever we see something that looks like it's being used as money. Let's start with the so-called classic functions of money. The 19th century economist William Stanley Jevons wrote about these, but they really go back all the way to Aristotle and the ancient Greeks in the 4th century BC. For the ancient Greeks, they were witnessing the birth of long-distance trade, the rise of markets, and the consequences of markets for the economy and for politics. And Aristotle and the ancient Greeks noticed that money seemed to serve 3 or 4 core functions. The primary one, the most important one, was that money served as a means of exchange in marketplaces. This is a picture of an open-air market in Haiti, an informal market, just people by the side of the road with vegetables that they've grown on their land or in their backyard, and they've come together to exchange them for money. This is a way for people to earn small amounts of money for them to use to buy the other necessities of life. So in an open-air marketplace, in any marketplace, money is the thing that we use as a means of exchange. It's the thing that we use that intermediates our exchanges with one another. You see here this woman has some peppers, the person behind her has some greens or lettuce or something. One of the ways that they're going to go about trading peppers for lettuce or any other item is through the means of exchange, money. That's the first primary function of money. Some exchanges don't take place in a marketplace. Some exchanges don't really have to do with the market at all, but with other kinds of social relationships or other kinds of relationships with institutions. This is a bunch of gold, some jewelry and some bracelets that's going to be given to a bride by her husband when they marry. This is from Ethiopia. And in this country, and in many countries around the world, there are various exchanges of goods that take place at a wedding to signify the new change in status and the new relationship between the husband and wife and their families. Now, this isn't really an exchange. It's not that you're buying the woman with the gold in this case. Instead, we call it a payment. It's a payment that takes place in a non-market context where there aren't prices per se. Instead, it seems that there's kind of an arbitrary value or an arbitrary fee set on the exchange taking place, in this case, through a wedding. You might think of things like this too in terms of fines that you pay for a parking ticket, or even in some instances taxes or tithes that you would pay to a religious institution. It's not really a means of exchange here. Instead, money is serving as a method of payment for these kinds of non-market relationships. Crucially, money is a store of value. Money is a way that we have to preserve value over time. And I have a picture of goats here because in many parts of the world, livestock and animals serve a store of value function as well. They live a long time, they last, they endure from season to season. They do have a lifespan, of course. And when you want to liquidate them, well, you can sell them in a market, or you can slaughter them and eat them, or milk them and gain the use of them that way. But they serve as a kind of store. They serve as a way of preserving value over time. And in many contexts in history and across cultures, we see that money also serves this store of value function. Money is a thing that you can convert all your other things into to hold on to value over long periods of time. Think if you had lots and lots of bushels of corn. You could put them all in a storehouse and thereby preserve their value. But undoubtedly there's going to be mice and rats, there might be rain that will introduce mold and rot and that kind of a thing. So corn over time is not such a great store of value. Enter money, right? If we have some kind of token or some sort of agreed upon object that we use that's more durable, that endures over time, then we have something that helps us store value. Lastly, money is a measure of value. And this is something that the ancient Greeks and Aristotle were very interested in. They were interested in the creation of a kind of yardstick a measuring stick that could help establish ratios of value among different items. So for instance, if we have one scale according to which we measure value, then you can compare things like this paperclip with the watch or with the stapler. We can put things on one scale of value using one set of numbers, all referring to money, in order to make comparisons and to establish ratios between items. So we can ask questions like, how many paper clips does it take to buy a stapler? How many watches would it take to buy a car? And so on. How many chickens are worth how many stone bricks, etc., etc. One of the interesting things about this function of money, about money as a measure of value, is it does something pretty magical. We say that it allows for commensuration. And what that is basically the establishment of equivalences among things that are not equal to one another. It allows us to establish equivalences among different things. So, for instance, we can ask, how could we compare a jacket to a diamond ring, to a bag of rice, to a carpenter's labor, to a technician's skill, to a mind's knowledge? Well, money, in its measure of value function, basically allows us to do just that. It allows us to commensurate incommensurabilities. That is, it allows us to equate things that are fundamentally, essentially different from one another. This is a puzzling thing. This is, as I said, a magical thing. Karl Marx wrote that in this function, money makes impossibilities fraternize. It makes the impossibility of a diamond ring ever being equal to, my wool jacket take place. It allows comparisons to be made according to one scale of value that maybe can serve important social functions, but then again, maybe not. And this is, for many people, the danger of money. For many people, the danger of money is that in commensurating incommensurabilities, it leads to a kind of moral and ethical and political confusion. So for instance, should everything be placed on one scale of value? What about a human kidney? This is a human kidney. How do we think about that? How do we think about commensuration as a kind of generalized process that would allow for the equation of everything on one scale of value? Do we think that we should be able to place a kidney on the same scale of value, a student loan? And here's a humorous proposal for how to repay your student loans by selling off your organs. You're welcome to read the article in your spare time. More seriously, there are other instances where we have to wonder, is it appropriate ever for there to be one scale of value applied to everything? Is universal commensuration a good idea? What about slavery? Right? Here is a map of the incidence of slavery around the world today. The percentages by population by country may not seem that great to you, but when you consider how many billion people we have on the planet, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people contemporary in slavery. Do we think that human life should be placed on the same scale of value as everything else? So commensuration and this final function of money that Aristotle and the Greeks worried about, money as a measure of value, commensuration, the placing of all things on one scale of value, poses really important moral and political quandaries. To sum up these classic functions, money is a means of exchange, it's a measure of value, it's a method of payment, and it's a store of value. And our money today does all of these things. We can use a dollar bill to go and buy something in the market. We can use the dollar to rank everything on one scale of value. We can use the dollar as a means of payment. We can use it to pay off a fine or a fee, or to give in a gift, which is another kind of social payment. And we can use it as a store of value. We can take that dollar and put it under the mattress, and in a year it'll still be there, it'll still be worth $1, even if the value of the dollar has changed somewhat. So our money unifies all of these functions. We find it filling all of these functions. Now, Paul Bowen, in his article about the TIF economy in the early to middle 20th century, points out that there, before the advent of colonialism, before the British came and took over the place and started instituting a new kind of economy and political order, among the TIF, there wasn't universal commensuration. you couldn't put everything on one scale of value in terms of money. And there also wasn't one money for all things. Instead, among the TIV, the economy was divided up into different spheres. There were different, distinct, separate domains, and it was very difficult to convert or exchange between those domains. This was a multi-centric economy, Bohannon writes. Multi-centered. There were at least 3 distinct economies basically going on at the same time, each with their own rules of exchange within them, where conversions between the spheres were very difficult and morally sometimes quite troubling. So one sphere was subsistence items, food, and some tools. You could exchange subsistence items and food and tools for each other. Another sphere of higher prestige items included some special brass rods, cattle, a special kind of cloth, and slaves, and you could actually use the brass rods as a kind of money to exchange between cattle and cloth, or slaves and cloth, and so on. And then finally, the highest sphere of all was marriageable women, where marriage exchanges, marriage payments would be arranged between elders as they were deciding who would marry who in the generation below them. And women were a very important item, so to speak, in this economy. What Bohannon does is he asks us, if we see a situation where money is not fulfilling all of the 4 classic functions, and if we see a situation where we don't have universal commensuration of everything into one form of money, we need to pay attention then to whether we have situations of what he called special purpose money taking place, whether we have money that can only be used for certain things and not for everything. Special purpose money stands in contrast to our kind of, early 21st century Western capitalist general purpose money. The dollar is a general purpose money. You can use it for everything, right? So whenever we see something that looks like money, we might want to ask ourselves the following questions. What functions does it fulfill? Can it serve as a means of exchange? Can it serve as a method of payment? Can it serve as a store of value? Can it serve as a generalized measure of value, as a yardstick, to be used to commensurate all things? What functions does it fulfill? Is it special purpose or general purpose? Can it only be used for certain items or certain things in certain times? Or can it be used for everything, all the time? And what kind of economy does it live in? In that economy, is there one measure or standard of value, or are there multiple standards of value? Are there different moral weights given to placing value on certain categories of goods? Is placing things on one standard of value in terms of money morally problematic all the time, sometimes, for certain kinds of items, and so on? These are basic questions that you should ask whenever you see something that looks like it's serving as a kind of money. Now, just to take this a bit further, there's another important function of money here, and that's that money also serves as a unit of account. And here I have an accounting book, a ledger book, of a merchant in India who's keeping track of debts that are owed to him. When we think of money as a unit of account, as a way of keeping track of credits and debts that we have with one another, then we don't even really need to think of money as a kind of token at all, as a coin or a bill that's passed from hand to hand. We don't need coins or bills as long as we have a way of recording our debts to one another that everybody will agree upon. In medieval Europe, during times when there was a scarcity of coin, people would often use what are called tally sticks, and this is an example of a tally stick from the Swiss Alps. They'd mark little notches on the stick indicating credits or debts to each other, and then they'd split the stick in two, and each party to the transaction would hold on to one piece of the stick. In order to see the full record of the transaction, you need to bring both sticks together to verify it. This became a very common way throughout medieval Europe of recording transactions without money. You would have whole bunches of tally sticks circulating with different notches being added to them and so forth, and they'd be passed hand to hand. They'd be split so that each party would have a piece of the transaction record. They would bring them back together again to record new transactions, split them again, circulate them around with other people, and these essentially became a kind of giant distributed record of all of the credits and debts in society. Now, in England, in the 16 and 1700s, tally sticks were a very common way of recording credits and debts to the government and to the banks and the treasury. One virtue of tally sticks is you don't need to be able to read or write to use them. You can be illiterate, you don't have to know numbers or adding, as long as you can tick the little tallies off, the little marks off on the stick. But by the 1700s, there were enough people in England who were literate and numerate that the Treasury decided that they would abolish the use of tally sticks altogether. And they were all brought together. They were abolished, their use was abolished in 1826, and it was ordered that they should all be burned and destroyed. Well, unfortunately, when they started to burn them all, they weren't really paying very much attention to what you do when you burn large piles of dry sticks inside the Houses of Parliament, and the burning of the tallies led in 1834 to this gigantic fire that destroyed the House of Lords and Commons in England. The whole thing, almost the whole thing had to be rebuilt. Just a funny story about unintended consequence of a transition in money and in the recording of debts. So let me just review a little bit over what is money. Now, the classic definition, again, talks about these various functions, that money is a measure of value, a means of exchange, a method of payment, and a store of value. The classic definition goes along with an origin story for money that locates the origins of money in barter. When we are bartering things like these two medieval chaps here, one has bushels of something or other in bags, the other has some cloth, and they're trying to exchange and trying to decide how much cloth do you get for how many bushels and so forth. When we're doing barter, sometimes we have problems because what if I've got bushels and I don't want cloth, I want cows? Well, the guy only has cloth here in our picture, so what am I going to do? What we can do is use a new token or use a new means of accounting to solve this problem. Money comes in to mediate this exchange and to solve what's called the problem of the double coincidence of wants. Now, the thing with this origin story is that in the anthropological and archaeological record, we don't have very much evidence that this ever actually happened in a large-scale societal kind of way, where all of a sudden everybody said, hey, bartering is wasting us time and it's not very efficient, let's invent money. What we see instead is something that really seems to emphasize much more the function of money as a unit of account. That money is a system of debits and credits without tokens, and people are using things like tally sticks or other memory devices to keep track of exchanges with one another. Here we say that instead of in the beginning was barter, in the beginning was the gift, or in the beginning was credit, or in the beginning was the receipt. In the beginning was a system of recording transactions without necessarily using any kind of token. The image here is of a Northwest American Indian group, the Kwakiutl, in the 19th century, holding a potlatch, a big feast where people would come together, big exchanges would take place, and a whole lot of wealth goods would be destroyed to show the kind of power and magnificence of the ruler. In effect, these kinds of occasions, this kind of potlatch, serves as a kind of record of the transactions that take place in the society. Now, an anthropologist looking at money sees a bunch of different things around the world and historically. We see social currencies. We see currencies that are used specifically to create and break relationships and rank. These are items, tokens, pieces of metal, pieces of cloth, jewelry, and so forth that are used whenever we want to mark a transition in a relationship, a marriage, a birth, a death, or whenever we want to mark a transition in rank, when a junior becomes an elder or a low status person becomes a high status person. These are special purpose currencies. They're only used for these kinds of social contexts. We also see in the anthropological record a lot of unwritten and written forms of transactional record keeping, even without the use of coin or bills. We see things like the inking kipu, which are these long knotted strings that were used to keep records of transactions. We see tally sticks. We also see in the ancient Near East cuneiform tablets that served as receipts of transactions that were held in a central storehouse then, kept by scribes and verified by various kinds of practices like duplicating the writing on a tablet onto another tablet or onto a clay envelope that encompassed the original tablet. It's only with the rise of agriculture, with large-scale centralization, and the rise of the state in the ancient world that we start to see tokens used as money, that we start to see things like coins. And coins are used to pay tribute, coins are used to pay taxes. The origin of money as a token goes back to ancient Anatolia, which is now present-day Turkey, to the province of Lydia in the 4th century BC, where coins were put out into the populace as a sign of sovereignty. They were issued to pay soldiers, and soldiers were required over time to pay some of them back in the form of taxes. And that created a kind of market in the state's token, and it was a way for the state to express its sovereignty over people. But merchants, people who started to use coin for other transactions, had a whole other set of concerns in mind. They had a whole bunch of other things to worry about besides just, am I showing my fealty to the sovereign when I pay a tax using the sovereign's token? They were worried about verifying transactions. Is this coin any good? Have other people held it before me? Are those people of good character and good standing? Should I trust this new device, this new technology, this coin? And what they did is they put little marks all over the coins whenever they passed from hand to hand, essentially saying, I had this coin, you know me, you know I'm a good guy, you know I'm an honest merchant, so therefore this coin is probably an honest, good coin. And I could sort of notarize it over to you, I could sign it over to you whenever we engaged in a transaction. So over time, these coins became full of little marks. Over time, the coin themselves served as a kind of transactional database, as a kind of system of transactional record keeping. So money really is a system of transactional record keeping. That's easy to see when you look at something like your bank statement or your credit card bill, and you can see all of the credits and debits that have taken place there as a kind of big database. It's a little harder to see if you focus only on money as cash and coin. But we have to remember that even using cash and coin is itself engaging in a system of transactions, using material things, using material markers to indicate debts and credits. So when you think of money, think about those classic 4 functions, think about special purpose and general purpose, ask yourself what kind of economy it lives in, and then ask yourself how that money that you're exploring is serving as a kind of transactional database, is serving as a system for keeping records of credits and debts. That's all. Thank you.